offshore wind it's a wonderful resource, and I think you can learn a lot from Taiwan in terms of what to do.
Hello, and welcome to Perspectives with Nilo, a regular podcast that brings you news and views from around the world. You can find all of our past episodes on our blog site at pwnilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Nilo on your favourite podcast app. Ireland's offshore wind industry marked a new milestone in May with the awarding of the first round of offshore wind projects. The government has set a target to deliver 7 gigawatts of electricity from offshore wind by 2030 and has been busy putting a framework in place to ensure successful delivery. However, Ireland is already lagging behind our European neighbours in what is fast becoming a highly competitive international industry. The Pacific island nation of Taiwan has been deploying offshore wind generation since 2017. With a landmass half the size of Ireland and a population of over 23 million, the lack of space on land, together with abundant wind resources, means most major developments are offshore. Many EU states, like Denmark, are actively partnering with Taiwan for investment opportunities and technical expertise. During a recent trip to Taipei, I spoke with Angelica Oung, energy reporter specialising in offshore wind, the grid and nuclear power, about the history of wind power in Taiwan, how the government there has engaged with the industry and the learning so far. So Angelica, you're very welcome to Perspectives with Nilo. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm so glad to be here. In fact, I'm so glad you are here since we're recording in my home.
First question I had for you on wind power is, seeing as Taiwan is an island on the edge of the Pacific, there's obviously abundant wind power available to Taiwan. What's the history of wind power in Taiwan from a high level?
Well, actually, Taiwan has some of the best wind farm in the world, because the wind just come ripping through the Taiwan Strait off the west coast of the island. And it's relatively shallow there, so it's great conditions for putting in wind turbines. And we kind of knew that we are going to need this electricity, this offshore electricity, because we're such a small island. So we have 23 million people here in Taiwan as opposed to 5 in Ireland. And there's a lot of manufacturing. It's really hard to get your energy use down when manufacturing is the basis of your GDP. And because we have limited land, we know that solar can only get us to a certain place and onshore wind can only get us so far. So we had to look offshore to expand our renewable energy portfolio.
And Taiwan has been building offshore wind since 2017. How much capacity has it built out so far?
Well, so far it's only been a few hundred megawatts. We're still in the ramping up process. Obviously, the lead time for the first offshore wind farms were longer. But I think we've made tremendous progress given that it's only been a few years. We have, I believe it's like 3 that are complete and quite a few more that are in process and in the pipeline.
And so at the present time, it's hundreds of megawatts it's producing. And what are the kind of typical project sizes or allotments that make up that current contribution?
Well, we're seeing wind development in rounds. And the first round, the sizes were very small. We're talking about let's see, Formosa 1, the first wind farm in Taiwan, was just 125 megawatts. But of course, as we progressed to round 2, the size of the wind farm got a lot bigger, and you started seeing anything up to, I believe, the biggest one, which is the Hai Long project, which won't be constructed until 2025. I think that's like 1.5 gigawatts, something like that. In that range. But the funny thing is, after round 2, where we saw both smaller and bigger projects, a real range of sizes, in round 3, Taiwan's government went back on that and instituted a cap of 500 megawatts. That might get shifted around a little bit because industry is saying that's way too small and there's no economy of scale.
So I guess learnings will be had between now and future years to maybe resize it, is what you're saying.
Well, Neil, you've worked in Taiwan, so you know that the way we Taiwanese do things can be like just to get it started, right? Get it started. It's like we will and out of the APEC area, non-China APEC area market, this is what we're known for. It's the speed and the high level policy direction that is extremely ambitious. But unlike Japan, we never really bothered, for instance, we never really bothered to set up like a truly comprehensive framework before we got started. And there's a good and bad in that. The bad is, of course, sometimes we are learning as we're doing, and then it forces a lot of course corrections, which can be tremendously expensive when you're talking about this like offshore wind farms. Even a small one it goes up to billions of US dollars. But the good thing is, at least we got started. At least we have turbines in the water generating electricity, which Japan doesn't really have yet.
In Ireland, we've had a lot of challenges with the planning process. There's been a lot of red tape in terms of getting permission to actually deploy wind turbines offshore. How has that been in Taiwan? Is that something that the government have managed to successfully resolve ahead of time, or are there like unexpected obstacles encountered?
Well, I think that's normal all over the world to have permitting problems, and it is actually one of the biggest obstacles for the energy transition globally, worldwide, is how do we cut down on that red tape in a way that is still respectable to the environment and other. In Taiwan, unfortunately, we really have had our fair share of issues with permitting, and the problem is we chose this method, which again got things off the ground pretty quickly, where I'm going to elide some, because of course there were differences through the different rounds. But basically we took an approach, which is you, the developer, you kind of go out and prospect, and you can choose this area. Like, you want this area? Okay, you have to do all the you have to all do a site inspection. You have to do all the, you have to count the animals, the birds, all that sort of thing. And then you submit your application. And if somebody else wants that same patch, if you have a conflict, then you both have to do all the work. And then the person with the most optimal bid wins. Now, in a way, this is advantageous for developers because in most places, the seabed lease can be tremendously costly. They usually, I think, most countries choose for the government to do more of the front end work, and then bid the parcel. And the good thing is, of course, it's less work for the developers. They don't have to go and prepare all that information to show that it is a suitable parcel. But then the problem is you might have a lot of competition in the bidding process, and those leases end up being extremely expensive. I can't say that the Taiwanese way of doing things is better or worse. I can certainly think of a lot of problems with this method, but it did allow us to get off the ground very quickly and without too much government involvement, which always slows everything down.
And in terms of the commitment from the successful developers that are chosen, do they have to guarantee a price for the electricity they produce? For example, in Ireland's latest round of offshore wind, the average price of €86 per megawatt hour is what the government tell us has been agreed on as part of the bidding process by these companies. How does that work in Taiwan?
Well, Taiwan's different. As far as I understand it, in Ireland has electricity markets. In Taiwan, there's just you know, one state-run electricity company, and they set the price of electricity. And so there isn't a market for the offshore wind developers to guarantee the price of. So what they do is they settle a price in advance with the off-taker before they even build the farm. And they do this for the 20-year lifetime of the farm. And they have to do this so that the banks will lend them the money. So back in round one and two, this was done through what's called an FIT, a feed-in tariff. It's a mechanism that was actually pioneered in Germany. And the idea is you have to make it worth their while for the developers who's going first, because they're encountering the most difficulties. You can price down after that, but you have to support the ones that are willing to go first. So usually the feed-in tariff is higher in the beginning and slowly comes down. And the way Taiwan successfully attracted a lot of world-class developers to Taiwan was at one point it had one of the most generous FITs in the world. And that, especially around 2015, that really got all the developers' attention, because the European market was down during that time. It was more saturated, and the demand hasn't come back like it did recently due to the Ukraine war and new urgency for renewable energy.
I notice also that Taiwan in round three has brought in some localization requirements. Basically, I think you wrote in your unredacted.biz blog that there's a 27-item local content requirement in round three to use local, I guess, supplied materials and components for these successful bidders. Is that viewed as a positive or a negative thing?
Well, I can tell you this. If you want cheap energy, for goodness sake, don't do what Taiwan did. Because not only did we institute a localization requirement, we made it pretty onerous because of a lack of flexibility. So out of these 27 items that have to be made in Taiwan, at least in part, I think that 60% of these 27 items have to be made in Taiwan. Some of them only have one Taiwanese-based supplier. And let me tell you, if you're the only supplier of this item, like, how does that affect your decision-making process when you're setting the price? So there's some real lack of competitiveness, and that, I think, has led to Taiwan ending up building some of the most expensive offshore wind farms in the world. I can tell you that I'm not against localization. I think it's always good when you're investing this much in a basic infrastructure for the industry to give back to the country that's hosting them, and to give back especially to the community that has to live with these turbines. And, I personally think they're beautiful, but what's important is that the whole community have to think they're beautiful and that they're an asset, not a liability. So that buy-in can be generated with localization requirements, but the thing to do is to make them flexible. And to do that, you can look to your neighbors, to the UK. They have their localization requirement. It is a percentage-based localization requirement. Quite frankly, I think they could have even they could have done a little bit more, but that enabled them to build out their wind farms very quickly, while also encouraging local development.
You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of industry in Taiwan, and a lot of us in the West would associate Taiwan with high tech and a lot of development of technology like that. Do you think these localization requirements are driving some activity to in R&D and other areas related to wind power that may be beneficial longer term? Maybe hard to see the results in the short term, but do you think that will benefit?
I think that it's certainly driven a tremendous amount of activity. We are making all sorts of things that we wouldn't be making in Taiwan absent of this localization policy. And we're talking about pretty major pieces of kit. We're talking about enormous offshore wind foundations. We're talking about tower pieces, nacelle pieces. One thing that I really wish Taiwan did is I really wish they took a look at what are the specific area we could see synergy and where Taiwan could benefit from our existing strength. Because a lot of what I think of as localization that's inefficient is where we're trying to build up an industry where Taiwan is has already lost on the starting line. In particular, I'm thinking of the building of the giant underwater foundations, because we don't have the enormous amount of labor that's required. To high quality welders are going to be in huge demand if you want to develop an offshore wind industry, and actually make the kit yourself. We don't have that. We don't have the access to ginormous amounts of steel, and we don't have the enormous amount of hinterland near the harbor that's needed to make it as competitive as, say, the Koreans. But then again, I feel like with industrial policies, there's always a lot of short-term pain, and you don't really know in the middle of it whether there's going to be long-term gain. For instance, the Koreans, they are really strong in shipbuilding because they did support that industry early on.
And you mentioned earlier that most of the wind farms in Taiwan at the moment are on the west coast, which is in the Taiwan Strait, where the water is shallower. And I presume these are like fixed turbines that are anchored are fixed on the ocean floor, basically.
Well, for now they are. As you get closer and closer towards the center of the strait and even beyond, you're going to get finally, it's going to be too deep to support turbines that's bottom fixed. So right now, maybe 60 meters is as deep as you can go and still use fixed bottom construction. Beyond that, you have to go into floating. And that's really tricky because basically we know it works because we're taking a lot from the oil and gas business. They pioneered those floating platforms and they used it successfully for many years, even decades. But the problem is, if you have an oil and gas platform, you need one per drilling spot. With offshore wind, you need a floating platform for every single turbine. So all of a sudden, what was economical when you just needed a few, it becomes massively uneconomical. So this means that we need to find a way to massively price down these foundations. And personally, that makes me nervous as hell because people are making massive investment decisions already based on that technology maturing. But my friends in the industry tell me to calm down, and they've done this before. Like, it used to be that the foundations are like, if you just took a stick and stuck it into the ground. It's called the monopile for obvious reasons. When that got to be too limited, they developed something called a jacket, which is like way more complicated, and it's more like a 3 or 4 legged stool, but enormous. And that development process was also very aggressive, and they managed to make it work. And they project that this is going to be the same going to floating. They've demonstrated that it's engineering is feasible. Now they just have to cost it down.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I was curious about on the floating side is once you have the floating technology at an affordable price, then it opens up new areas where you can deploy. And I know Taiwan's east coast, which faces the Pacific, obviously it's a much deeper, because there's a shelf there, right in the ocean, it's much deeper water. But I may be wrong, but I have to ask you: is there more sustainable wind energy on the east coast than there would be on the west coast?
Well, first of all, just by going deeper into the ocean, you're getting more stability. The winds are going to be stronger and they're going to be more constant, which means that you can get your capacity factor up. So we're definitely developing into deeper waters, but funnily enough, it's still mostly going to be on the western side, and that's simply due to the way the winds are blowing. And on the eastern side, it's not just deeper, but your wind quality is not going to be as good. Also, it there's less industrial development on the eastern part of Taiwan. But if I get to like go off the reservation for 1 second, because in addition to offshore wind, like one of the technologies that's so dear to my heart is called OTEC, Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, and I actually believe that the eastern side of Taiwan has just tremendous potential for developing that energy, because ocean thermal energy conversion, very simply, it takes the thermal difference between very deep water and the warmer water in the shallow water, and they use that to drive a turbine eventually with ammonia. So in Taiwan, because you have that huge drop off that makes it impossible to put in wind farms cheaply, you have access to both warmer surface water and very cold deep water at the same time. So I'm hoping that within the next decade or so, like something can happen there.
That's a very, I mean, I think from an Irish perspective, because I think our Irish economic area where we can deploy wind turbines, or maybe where we can deploy anything, this new technology you mentioned also, maybe that's also something Ireland should look at, because I think being on the edge of the Atlantic, I'm sure we have access to deep water where that may also be effective.
Well, the wonderful thing with Ireland is you guys have so much offshore wind to discover still. Now, OTEC, it's a very immature technology. I personally love it. But for Ireland, I think getting started on offshore wind is a wonderful opportunity.
Can I ask again about the offshore wind in Taiwan? Are there many foreign partnerships in the area of wind technology? I was speaking to the Danish representative office here in Taiwan at their EU and Taiwan Day a few weeks ago, and they mentioned to me that one of the reasons they have an office here in Taiwan is to facilitate these exchanges, these technical exchanges, in that they see particular relevance in engaging with Taiwan. So, are there many foreign companies and foreign jurisdictions engaging with Taiwan on wind power?
Absolutely, and we absolutely must rely on them. I think one of the most correct things that the Taiwanese government has done was to set a very clear policy direction very early, so that it made these offshore wind companies feel safe to come here and invest and truly make roots here and grow. Because actually, offshore wind is a tremendously young technology. Uh, I would say it's only really 20 years old. If you go back further than that, sure, there's some beginnings, but people were basically still arguing on over whether it's worth it, because it is, after all, incredibly challenging endeavor. As a result of its relative youth as an industry, just the kind of people with experience, somebody who's actually completed a wind farm project as a package manager or developer or anything, they're really super rare, and they are rightly hot commodity. And the way these developers work is by going from country to country, project to project, and it. I think it's really really hard to get a wind farm project off the ground in any country without the help of one of these experienced developers, typically from Europe. Typically, not all, but typically from Europe, especially from Denmark, from Germany, those areas. Yeah.
One of the things you alluded to earlier was that a lot of countries in the EU have become more concerned about their sources of energy since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And, they're trying to wean off dependence on Russian oil and gas. We've seen in Taiwan how the CCP could potentially put a blockade on Taiwan in their military exercises, for example, after Nancy Pelosi's visit last August. So my question is, what's Taiwan's thinking as regards this energy independence concept and maybe wind power being part of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that Taiwan is currently both shamefully and dangerously reliant on fossil fuel. And unfortunately, that's going to be the case going quite a bit into the future. We still burn quite a lot of coal, 30-40% coal. Gas, it's rising from, I think is it 40% now, and we want to get it up to 50%, to try and reduce coal. And unfortunately, we made the really foolish decision, in my mind, of getting rid of nuclear power. That was a stable source of energy that is not only low carbon, but you can store the fuel on site, so you're not reliant on LNG vessels coming into Taiwan. You have to understand right now, with the amount of receiving capacity and storage facility in Taiwan, we can only hold about 7 to 14 days of LNG on the island at any one time. I think that leaves us tremendously vulnerable in a blockade scenario. And of course, we want more offshore wind and solar and geothermal. But right now, all of this excess capacity, it's not enough just to make up for all the nuclear that we're losing. So my hope is that Taiwan can see the light on this and realize we need more renewables, we need more nuclear, and let's get off the LNG and the coal. But politically, there's no support really for nuclear. So it looks like that makes our offshore wind and solar resources even more precious, because China's not going to be able to stop the wind or the sun.
Is there any other way the government are incentivizing this move to sustainable energy?
Well, the government, I would say, has been extremely crafty in drafting Taiwan's very successful tech companies in their quest to boost renewable energy, because basically all the big tech companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and many more besides, they've made very ambitious climate goals. They've mostly signed on to the RE100 pledge at different levels of aggressiveness. And to be a part of their supply chain starting as early as 2030, in the cases of Apple and Google, I believe, you have to be able to show that you produced, for instance, TSMC. You have to show that the chips that you're selling to Apple were made with renewable energy. And the largest bulk form of renewable energy that you can purchase in Taiwan are going to be from those offshore wind farms. And the latest round of auctions that took place last year, the round 3.1 auctions, the average bid price for the power, you talk about you talk about the price of Ireland going up to what is it?
86
86
euro per megawatt hour. Yeah.
So I don't even have to do the conversion between euros and Taiwan dollars because the bid price was zero. And the reason why, of course, they're not doing these wind farms out of charity or the goodness of their hearts, but the reason they bid zero was so that they can secure those projects and then turn around, instead of selling it to the power to Taipower, they sell it to TSMC or whatever Taiwanese tech company. And those sums are not disclosed, but we can surmise that it's at least enough to make it worth their while. I think my experience when it comes to Taiwan is that the offshore wind it's a wonderful resource, and I think you can learn a lot from Taiwan in terms of what to do, which is what Taiwan did right, getting things started off early, setting a ambitious and clear policy direction so that you can attract people to come and play. But I think we can also learn about what Taiwan did wrong, which is not thinking ahead to having a complete policy framework. And also, to me, what Taiwan did wrong is maybe like going too heavy on the localization. I think it's great to insist that developers give a certain percentage back to the community. You can say, okay, 60% of what you buy should be connected to the local economy, or the Irish economy in some way, or maybe smaller. I don't know. It depends on what Ireland has to offer in terms of manufacturing. I think you can do that, but you can't insist that this gadget you have to make it here. I think that's not the way the world works. I would really much rather see a focus on getting costs down.
Yeah. Okay. Or maybe, as you said, focus on like strengths in terms of like not forcing development of certain technology,
Exactly.
but focusing on the ones where that you have a lead, like you said, you have a lead start, or you have the capability, and focusing on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely the way to go, is to focus on your strength and focus on working together, because actually if you look at all the not even Denmark does it alone. The reason why the offshore wind industry was able to rise so quickly and to such a large scale is because they took talent and they took manufacturing capabilities from the country that's in the best place to service that thing. And actually, you know what? Ireland, part of the EU, so I don't even know, like under the EU rules, how much a local preference your government would be allowed to show. But what it can certainly do is to encourage complementary investment and to kind of add Ireland's strength to the global offshore wind supply chain.
That's Angelica Oung, who is a Taiwan-based energy reporter specialising in offshore wind, the grid and nuclear power. My sincere thanks to Angelica for sharing her valuable insights with us on Perspectives with Nilo. You can find out more about her work on our blog site at pwnilo.com, where we have linked Angelica's website and some additional references for you to dive deeper. As mentioned earlier, although still very young, offshore wind is fast becoming a highly competitive international industry. Given the high demand for expertise and knowledge, the benefits of collaborating with other countries like Taiwan cannot be overstated. It's interesting to note that Danish multinational energy company Ørsted, who recently signed a wind power deal with the ESB in Ireland, are in the process of delivering their largest project outside Europe in Taiwan. This is their second project there, with a third in the pipeline. Definitely an area with a lot going on, and a topic we hope to revisit in the future. In the meantime, you can follow Perspectives with Nilo on Spotify, iTunes, and most podcast apps, as well as on Instagram and Twitter. And we'd really appreciate a like or a follow if you enjoy our content. Well, that's where we leave it for the moment. Until the next time, thank you for listening. Slán ag Spanacht.